The following episode of Anchored in Education was previously recorded on Sunday, April 19th as a live episode. Welcome to Anchored in Education Live, Sunday, April 19th. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. All right, thank you for joining us on this evening on Anchored in Education, the live edition. It is Sunday, April 19th, and the current time is 6:04 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We had a little bit of technical difficulties getting everything fired up and going today, but it looks like we're going strong now. I am your host, Dr. E. Scott England, and I'm excited to be here. We took off last week due to Easter. Still put out regular programming last Monday, and I hope everyone enjoyed that podcast that we released last Monday. It was called The Not Me Attitude, and even though it wasn't live last week, I still took time to talk about how COVID-19 is affecting us. And this goes with the previous 3 live episodes in which we've talked different ways to support educators during these unprecedented times in education. We talked about what to do in those specialized areas in the curriculum. We talked about how to still include student voice and just other different techniques for rural schools in remote education. So, as of just a few hours ago, I checked in, and 26 states have closed to in-person learning for the rest of the academic year. And so that puts more than 25.3 million students who will finish their year on remote learning. And my state, Illinois, is now one of those. But the learning has not and will not stop. Because of this, we're continuing the conversation on remote learning, and our focus this week, though, isn't about effective remote learning practices. Instead, this week, we are talking about increased stress and anxiety, as well as science-based strategies to decrease stress during these times. This episode is for everyone. I'm talking educators, parents, students, and to help me out, I've brought back a previous guest from Anchored in Education, the most amazing Julie Adams. Julie is a nationally board certified teacher, educator of the year, and a highly respected international consultant who has trained hundreds of thousands around the world in the science and strategies that skyrocket personal and professional success. She specializes in neuroscience, mental health and wellness, system efficiency, digital and instructional leadership, positive culture, social emotional learning, and best practices for literacy, critical thinking, and engagement. Julie is a fierce advocate for education, job training, and health and wellness, and has developed curricula, trained educators and leaders, and increased educational opportunities in some of the most remote areas of the world. She has partnered with Sue Enquist, UCLA softball 11-time national champion and Hall of Fame coach, to create one softball's 6 minutes to excellence program for athletes, families, and coaches. And she advises state departments of education and universities on best practices for achievement and instructional design. And most importantly, she is joining Anchored in Education Live with amazing insights into how we can make quarantine life a little bit better. And as a special treat, she is going to talk a little bit about her mastermind professional development opportunities. It's going to be a fun night, so sit tight and stay tuned. We'll be right back with Julie Adams. So this Anchored in Education live show is not typical, and it is fun, and I would love to do more, but I'd like for you to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whatever platform you get your podcasts. Every Monday, we have new episodes, and we have had amazing guests too. Our topics are endless. If it can even be remotely tied to education, we are going to talk about it. And we don't just talk to practicing educators, we often step outside of our profession to connect with those doing amazing things so then we can implement those ideas into our districts, our schools, and our classrooms. Because after all, we are all anchored in education. All right, we're back on Anchored in Education Live, and I'm joined by my friend Julie Adams. Good evening, Julie, and welcome to Anchored in Education Live.
Hello, I am so excited to be here again. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my goodness. So since we talked last week preparing for this episode, I have been through the roof excited. You're one of the co-authors of the best-selling books, Fully Charged and Fully Charged Systems. And so we know that being a teacher on a regular day can be stressful, right? I mean,
Right.
We've all been there. And being a parent almost every day can be stressful. And
Yep.
of course, being a student, regardless of age or grade level, can be stressful. So now, knowing all of that, let's throw in the variable called COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
What does this do for stress for each of these groups?
That's a great question. So many of my clients in the last several weeks have reached out to me asking two questions. Why is this quarantine stressing me and my kids out so much? And what are strategies we can employ to decrease this stress? Okay, so yes, my co-authors, Dr. PJ Kaposi and Dr. Rosa Isaiah, we actually discuss a lot of these ideas in our Fully Charged books. And so there's one principle that I want to share first, and that is that every morning we wake up with a rechargeable battery, our brain.
Yes.
Some of us wake up fully charged, but many of us are waking up drained. Our battery charge is influenced by powerful chemical reactions in our brains and body. So we have several battery charging positive chemicals that we want to increase, such as oxytocin, glutamate, serotonin, and norepinephrine, dopamine, just to name a few. And then we want to suppress our battery draining chemical cortisol. And when our chemicals are balanced, we experience a euphoric and powerful brain state where we can learn new skills, control our stress, and perform at high levels. And in the book, we refer to it as social emotional ecstasy. That's when we get our chemicals balanced.
Yes.
So we want to intentionally do things right now that increase those positive battery charging chemicals because of this stressful situation that we are in. Life is stressful enough, but when we throw in a pandemic on top of it,
right.
it tends to do really wacky things to our chemicals. So understanding that social, emotional, physical, and cognitive success is rooted in chemical reactions. In a stressful situation, our chemicals are impacted. So we want to just be extra sensitive to those and make sure we're increasing the positive battery charging ones and decreasing that draining cortisol one.
Yeah. And, so before we continue, I want to point out in our conversation, so I have two children, 13 and 8, but you have two girls that one is at kind of that milestone of her life, which is her
Right.
senior year.
Yes,
And
I have a 17-year-old daughter.
You do, and she was set to graduate this year. Well, she's
Yep.
still going to graduate.
Yes.
That's good. But I mean, what does that do when, seniors, high schoolers, they look forward to that fourth year of high school for so many, different
Oh my
reasons.
goodness.
And now
Right.
all of a sudden that's not there. I mean, what does that do for her, but then also for you and your husband?
It's excruciating, because life is made up of looking forward to exciting events, always having something on our calendar that we're looking forward to that's extra special, but then also looking back on those positive memories. And so to have something like this kind of take that away from our 2020 seniors right now,
Yeah.
that's particularly devastating. And not only that, but their brains are underdeveloped. And so young developing brains are those under about 25 years of age. And their brains are very different. And so they tend to be extra sensitive to stressful situations like this. So when we make comments such as, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, we're going to do a virtual graduation on the computer instead. That's going to be exciting. We'll
Yeah.
still get a cake,
Right.
Um, it's really actually their chemical and hormonal reactions to a stressful situation are much more amplified than even in the mature brain.
Yeah.
So having that extra patience and understanding and empathy toward them during these times is so important. So important.
Absolutely. And we do not want to downplay it. It is a big deal.
Right.
So,
Right. It is everything to them.
yeah.
And they're so socially connected. Just in their orientation right now, they just want to be with their peers, surrounded by their peers at all times. And even though they might be on social media, it still does not fill that face-to-face interaction that many of them are realizing is more important than they realized before.
Right. So on Anchored in Education, we have spent, I would say, countless episodes talking about taking care of ourselves, which often includes spending more time with family. Well, now we've been given more time with family.
Right.
And
Right.
families are, for a lack of better words, freaking out.
Right.
But it seems true. The novelty of spending day in and day out together, it seems to have quickly worn off. Is this normal for parents and students to feel like this?
Absolutely. First, it's important to understand that though we often enjoy our extra time together on the weekend or over the holidays, this is not an extended weekend or a holiday situation, which is designed to relax and recharge and step away from our day-to-day schedule and responsibilities. This is completely different. And so we still have the responsibilities. We are now, as parents, undertaking a lot of the teaching responsibilities as well, and helping to fill in the gaps as needed. Also, we are losing a bit of the sense of community and the sense of value and the purpose that we have in and outside of our homes.
Okay.
And so students have a sense of community in their school and in their classrooms. They also have a sense of value and purpose, and they kind of understand their role in the school setting. They also have a sense of community, value, and purpose in the home, just like adults do. We have a sense of community in our professional roles outside of the home, and we also have a sense of value and purpose. And so now all of those are being blended together and even eliminated in some aspects as we're having to revision our sense of community and value and purpose as we are being quarantined. And so that's a huge concept for us to understand. And so, yes, it's perfectly normal for both mature brains and young brains to be feeling as if they're on an emotional roller coaster, minute by minute, hour by hour. And then there are 3 neuroscientific principles that we discuss in our books that are important to keep in mind, too. The first is young brains are different. The
Very.
second is our brains are highly influenced by environment, especially young brains that, again, are different. And finally, success is not by chance, but by design. So, Scott, if you'd let me just expand a little bit on that first neuroscientific principle,
Please
young
do.
brains are different. Okay, this is important. I've had so many parents reach out to me, and I have to remind myself because I have my 17-year-old senior daughter home. I have my 20-year-old. We had to move her home from college. And I have a 27-year-old former student of mine. She was my 8th grade student years ago. She's been living with us for the last couple of years. So we have these 3 young women in our house. Working from home, finishing up their schoolwork from home, so on and so forth. My husband is working from home. I'm working from home. Okay, so let's talk about how young brains are different. First of all, the brain develops from the brainstem forward, and the last part of the brain to develop is called the prefrontal cortex, or the executive functioning center.
Okay.
And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for so many critical thinking and regulation skills. So skills such as cause and effect analysis, impulse control, emotional regulation, organization, and rational decision making. And so when we have a young brain in our environment who doesn't have these skills, oftentimes what happens is their amygdala, which is their stress response center, that fight, flight, freeze switch, that response center becomes overstimulated and overactive, which means they are almost always operating in fight, flight, freeze because of their underdeveloped prefrontal cortex executive functioning center. And so keeping that in mind, just normally, the young brain operates at a higher stress response level, and then add in these different pressures and situations and stressors. That, of course, is going to cause many mature brains
Absolutely.
more stress, because not only are we dealing with our stressors just in working from home or financial issues or whatever it is, but now we're also dealing face to face every day, day in and day out, with no reprieve in sight, if you will, right now, because we're kind of in the middle of this lockdown. We're not quite sure when we're getting out of it.
Yeah.
That is extremely stressful.
I think that it at least helps me, and I hope that it helps my listeners out there to hear you say this, because, my wife and I, we talk a lot, like we kind of feel guilty, like, we're really stressed, and we can't get away. Not that we want to run away, but I mean, at times it's like they're going to their friends or they go to their grandparents, and none of that is happening right now.
Right.
And so to hear you say that is normal,
perfectly normal.
It is perfectly normal. That takes a huge load off me, and so but to expand and to help families out even further, you have identified 7 science-backed feelings that may have reported that many have reported they are struggling with at this time, which is leading to this increased anxiety and stress. And as I read through the list, I was thinking, yep, I identify.
Right.
Let's spend a few minutes talking about these 7 feelings.
Okay. So it's all tied into the second neuro nugget, and that is our brains are highly influenced by environment. And this pandemic is, of course, sparking some serious environmental changes for us that are increasing our anxiety and stress. Again, it's perfectly normal to feel those right now. Now, one scientific principle to keep in mind here is our mind controls our brain. Our brain does not control our mind.
Okay.
And so our mind are our thoughts and feelings. Our thoughts and feelings, good or bad, then tells our brain what types of chemical reactions to trigger. And those chemical reactions are then sent to all of our body systems. So if we feel anxious and stressed and overwhelmed, then that triggers our brain to tell our body systems to say, hey, prepare for fight, flight, freeze, for attack, right? And so our oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, all of that is impacted and decreased, and our cortisol skyrockets. And so that's also why we will have so many symptoms when we feel a strong feeling, positive or negative. So when we feel stress and anxiety, Many times our heart rate increases, our breathing increases, our sweat increases, our pupils will dilate, our digestive enzymes will decrease. That's why we have stomach issues when we are stressed. But just keeping in mind that our thoughts and feelings trigger positive chemical reactions. And so it's important to be aware of our thoughts and feelings. A lot of people think it's more effective to suppress our anxiety and stress. But actually, what research shows is it's more effective to recognize and acknowledge our feelings, especially our negative ones,
Right.
because that level of self-awareness helps us to then self-manage them more effectively. And if you think about social emotional learning, the first social emotional competency is self-awareness. The second social emotional competency is self-management. And so recognizing our stress and anxiety, owning it, acknowledging it, helps us then to manage them more effectively. And so what we don't want to do is suppress. We want to say, you know what? I am stressed.
Yeah.
I am drained. I am overwhelmed. This is freaking me out. And then we can deal with them more effectively. But you're absolutely right. There have been 7 feelings that have been triggered in us that have been out in the media and in research. It's coming out. And so I just wanted to share those to make sure people are aware of them. We're not making this stuff up. This is actually being documented right now and contributing to our feelings of anxiety and stress. So as I go through this list of 7, see which ones you're feeling, or maybe you're feeling all of them. So feeling number 1 that we have right now is we feel we have no control in this situation.
Right. Feeling
number 2, we feel as if we have lost our freedom. Which here in the land of the free, the home of the brave, right?
Yeah,
that is
tough.
Something that is so ingrained in us. You know, I do a lot of work with international schools, travel to other countries, and I often come home thinking, thank goodness for our freedoms, right?
Right.
So number 2, yeah, we feel as if we have lost our freedom. Number 3, we feel stress from this economic uncertainty. So many of us have been drastically impacted economically.
Sure.
I know my husband and I, we own 5 different companies, and all of them have taken a serious hit. And so we, of course, want to continue to provide for our family, but also for we have over 100 employees and their families that we are responsible for. And so many of us are dealing with that stress right now too. So feeling number 4 is we feel isolated. We are actually very socially connected humans. It is the greatest influence on our long-term health and wellness is social connectedness. And if you want to learn more about that, I love Dr. Susan Pinker's TED Talk about it. So check it out if you want to learn about the research and the science behind social connectedness and the influence on our health and wellness, because the research is quite fascinating. But also connected to that idea of us being socially connected is also the idea of us being forced into connectedness with those that we are quarantined with.
Right.
And so it's one thing, to see each other in the evening and have a nice little chat over dinner. And we've been away from each other all day long, so we have a lot of stuff to talk about. But when we're together all day long,
yeah,
and we know everything that's going on, when we are interacting, I already know what's going on with your day because I'm right here next to you.
Hey, my wife on audio just gave me a look like we've been connected way too long.
Right, exactly. And that whole idea of forced connectedness, even though we feel isolated, is very stressful. Feeling number 5 is we feel fearful that we or someone we love might catch this virus. And then also the serious health complications involved with this thing that we're fighting, right? Feeling number 6 is we are mourning. We feel grief over the loss of our lives and before this whole situation. And then feeling number 7 is we just feel overwhelmed with all of it. And we are operating in fight, flight, freeze more than we often do. And especially people who have suffered from ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences.
Right.
The research in that shows that the more traumatic situations that we had as a child, or in other words, the more our fight, flight, freeze was switched on during childhood, the more likely it is to stay switched on and be our default mode when we are older and in stressful situations. And so people are finding that this type of forced connectedness, quarantine, pandemic, all the news and the media is on high alert. We have limited products in the stores, walking into a store and seeing an empty shelf. That's very uncommon here
Right.
in this country. And so just kind of feeling overwhelmed by all of it is really triggering for many past traumatic experiences where they have felt out of control as well. And so just being very empathetic and sensitive to the overwhelming social, emotional trauma that this really is increasing in people is important for us to keep in mind, especially when we are released to go back and be functioning together, kind of keeping that in mind because everybody is dealing with it differently.
Right.
I just heard this analogy that, we're all in the same boat, we're all in the same storm. And then somebody else said, well, actually, we might be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat, right?
Sure. Our
Because
boats
your
can look a lot
childhood,
different.
yes, your childhood, your experiences, your demographics, your financial situation, your stressors are very different. Your boat is very different than my boat.
Yeah.
And my 17-year-old's boat is very different than my 20-year-old daughter's boat. And, so that's important to keep in mind is even though it seems like we're all in the same situation, we're bringing different baggage to the situation.
Most
And
certainly.
that, of course, is important for us to understand.
Absolutely. And you did mention ACEs. There's a website you can go to take the
Absolutely.
free online ACEs assessment, and you can also access resources, and that is aces2high.com, and that's
That's right.
TOO. So aces2high.com is where
Right.
you can take the free online ACEs assessment, and then you can also access resources. And I think it's important to throw that out there right now. But as you
Absolutely.
go through the 7, I mean, absolutely, you may not feel them all at once, but most definitely, I think that at some point I've experienced one of these 7s throughout this time, and we're a good 1 month into. Or at least a 1 month into the mandated school closure, and we're coming up on the 1 month mark for the shelter in place, which for Illinois is still sits at the April 30th, and I know that many states, including surrounding us, and I think where you're at as well in California, has been extended into May, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Right. We out here in California, the last time I checked, is I don't think we actually have a plan.
Okay.
We're one of the few states that has not yet come out with a reentry plan, like
Okay.
so many other states have published. And our schools have pretty much, most districts have announced that they are not going to be returning this school year. There are still some districts with the plan of doing that, but that is now becoming more common throughout our state as well.
Right.
And Dr. Nadine Burke Harris's TED Talk about ACEs and how to effectively provide support to people in traumatic situations is also a great resource to check out too.
Okay.
But yes, all 7 of these feelings, Scott, can increase our cortisol,
Yeah.
which is our stress chemical, our battery draining chemical. And so what we want to do is we want to intentionally do things then to decrease that cortisol and increase the positive chemicals. And then we can have a sense of control and not be held captive by our anxiety and our stress. So I love that that commonly shared quote, courage is not the absence of fear or anxiety. It's really recognizing that anxiety and fear and then doing it afraid. And so that's why the strategies can be really helpful for us to employ that we're going to talk about too.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into the 7 science-backed strategies. So I don't want everybody thinking, okay, well they've given us the 7 reasons why my stress and anxiety is through the roof, but what do I do? But you've got some 7 science-backed strategies to decrease stress, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, I hope you don't mind, but you have a couple of virtual professional development and learning opportunities for both educators and families. And it's important that we're talking for families here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Fully Charged Educators Mastermind and the Fully Charged and Fierce Mastermind. So before we get into those strategies to decrease the stress, will you please talk to us a little bit about both of these courses, including everything that is offered and, I believe, if I saw on your website, a limited time special?
Yes. Thank you so much for bringing those up.
Yeah.
So I get to keynote events in education and corporate and athletics and parenting events all over the place. And a lot of times, the most common question I'm asked after I finish speaking is, how can I learn more? How can I get more of the science and strategies? And can I get some support and coaching from you also? And so I developed what are called masterminds. And masterminds are just positive learning communities where people are coming together. And I designed mine to be virtual. And so I have 2 masterminds, and both of them have 10 lessons that I recorded with study guides that go with them. Both of them have private Facebook communities where I provide live training focused on a different topic each month. And both of them have, you get a PDF of one of our fully charged books that goes along with the mastermind. So one of the masterminds is called Fully Charged Educators, and it focuses on neuroscience and critical thinking strategies and stress management, social emotional learning, Maslow-Bloom methods, trauma-informed practices, literacy engagement, all that good stuff. So if you're an educator, that might be a mastermind for you.
That's just screaming professional development to me.
Right, absolutely. And it's all virtual because so many of our professional development hours have been canceled and we don't know if we're going to get them back. This is a great opportunity to just be improving our skills and learning a little bit more so we come back fully charged. And then the other mastermind is called Fully Charged and Fierce. And this one focuses on the secrets of success, strengthening young brains, whether we're working with them or parenting them or coaching them. It also focuses on stress management skills, work-life balance, critical thinking, communication, conflict resolution, emotional intelligences, those soft skills, which we call power skills in our fully charged books, but many people refer to them as soft skills. Okay. And then just routines for success. What does your AM routine look like? What does your PM routine look like? Are you triggering positive chemical reactions that help you to be more successful? And so both of the masterminds, Fully Charged Educators and Fully Charged and Fierce, they are completely online and just a wonderful resource. And they normally sell for $497 each, and they are on sale right now during this pandemic for $37.
$37. I wanted to make sure that was not a misprint on the website.
That's right.
That is what the website said. $37. Normally,
$37, yeah.
$497.
That's right. Yeah.
And you can pick them up for $37
all
right now.
Online, all virtual learning.
And when you talk about
take
that
control.
Yeah, when you talk about that Facebook group, there's no other way to get access to that.
That's right. But it is private. That is the only place where I provide monthly live training and coaching and mentoring is to my private Facebook mastermind groups. That's it. Yeah. And I'm so thrilled. So many people have taken advantage and joined my masterminds. And I just love to provide that training and that coaching and that support in this positive learning community environment. It's really powerful. People are looking for connectedness, and this is just one way to get it.
Oh, absolutely. And so you talk about the fully charged and fierce mastermind. That this is a great one for parents, but also to sit and go through the course with their children.
Yes,
and because everybody benefits.
Yes, my kids have taken it. My kids' friends have taken it. I have university athletic teams that take it. But so many people have said, I sat down and did that first lesson by myself. And about halfway through it, I called my kids and my spouse in and said, sit down. We are doing this together.
Yeah.
So I'm really just honored that people have found it so helpful. So 2 virtual online masterminds to grow your skills, increase your knowledge, and just take advantage of a little extra time that we have right now to come back fully charged.
Absolutely. And
thank you.
Real quick too, the fully charged educators.
Yes.
For the districts out there listening, what can I do for these new teachers that I'm hiring? And this is a great onboarding for new teachers.
Absolutely. Because, so many districts are smaller and they don't have a whole department that can be devoted to coaching and mentoring their new teachers. And so this is a great way for me to provide some of that mentoring and coaching and training support as well. And I'm outside of the system. I don't have the emotional and political baggage sometimes that people have because they're within a system. So when people say, I had a conflict today with a colleague, and that conflict and that colleague is known for doing this and this and that, well, I have no idea. I don't know what the backstory is. So I'm just giving, just objective feedback and support. And the feedback from the masterminds has been really fantastic. So thank you for asking about it.
Absolutely. And we'll get back to the strategies to decrease stress, but I do want to point out that they can go to adamsteaching.com.
Yes.
And find the masterminds there, purchase them, and get started today. But after, of course, the podcast is over.
That's right. That's right.
All right, Julie, 7 science-backed strategies to decrease stress. I'm hoping we can briefly cover them all, but I want to start off by focusing maybe kind of heavy on numbers 1 and 2. And these are controlling the controllables and sticking to a schedule. It seems so simple when we read it. I know whenever I read it, I thought, well, I can do this, but it's more difficult than we may think. But how powerful are these 2 strategies?
Right. So these strategies are all tied in to, again, one of those neuro nuggets that we talk about in our fully charged books, and that is success is not by chance, but by design. And so what does research actually say and recommend in terms of the strategies that we can implement to help design our home environments right now so that they are decreasing stress, not increasing them? And so, yes, number 1, control the controllables. We feel as if everything is out of control, but if we really sit back and make a list of the things that we have control over, we want to go ahead and identify those things and then take control over them. And so a couple questions just to ask yourself is, what can you control today? And then what are some things you cannot control? And making those 2 lists really helps us to identify, number 1, we can control our attitude and how we're talking to our loved ones, and we can control our actions, what we're eating, what we are paying attention to in the media, how we're using our time, how we're taking care of ourselves and our loved ones. So attitude and actions is basically what it comes down to. And being aware of that increases our sense of control. The second one, I love sticking to a schedule.
Yes.
recently, NASA astronaut Scott Kelly, he wrote and published an article, and he was in space for over a year, completely quarantined, if you will. And he said, listen, you will lose your mind if you don't put a couple strategies into place. And he said, the first thing is you've got to stick to a schedule.
Yep.
And he said, it doesn't really matter what is on the schedule as long as your basic needs are met. But if you look a little further into research does actually recommend that there are 4 types of times that should be on our schedule each day. So the first is playtime. We should have playtime scheduled. It doesn't matter if it's scheduled for 1 time a day or 3 times a day, but that's when we are playing card games. We might be FaceTiming and playing a card game with someone. That might be video game time, exercise time, Simon Says time, hobby time, Legos, whatever. But that's just fun, recreational playtime. The second time that is recommended for us to be included in our daily schedule is quiet time. When we are reading, we're drawing, we're completing puzzles. We also might be watching TV or movies, meditating, praying, journaling, anything that's kind of quiet, reflective, calming, very important to have in our schedule. The third type of time to include in our schedule is family time. Now, some families are learning, maybe the first week your family time was extended 2 hours every night. We're going to spend meal prepping and eating and playing games together. And now that we've been together so much, that family time, the quantity might shift a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Shoot for 20 minutes a day. It might be 5 minutes 4 times a day. That's okay. It might be 20 minutes in the evening. But again, meal prepping, eating, chatting, playing little discussion games like Thorn and Rose,
Okay.
What's one of your things that you appreciate, which is your rose? And then what's one thorn or irritant that's kind of bothering you today? Simple little activity like that. And then the fourth time that is recommended for us to include in our schedule is work/learning time. And that would be the academic lessons that our kids are involved in. Maybe listening to family-friendly podcasts or TED Talks and growing those listening and note-taking skills. And also that will allow us that productive time professionally that we have. This is something that if we have a spouse or partner in the house with us and we have children, we have to collaborate on to come to an agreement. So maybe, you're taking 2 hours in the morning with your kids, and that allows your wife to get her professional stuff done. And then she's going to take the kids for a chunk of time in the afternoon. And that allows you to get your time done. But just coming up with a schedule and being sensitive to the needs of everybody, including these 4 types of times on our schedule every day, helps to flex different cognitive and emotional needs skills.
And that quiet time is so important. That just a time. It's funny. You want to talk about what got my amygdala going? I tried to set up my wife's new phone this weekend, and I did not have flight or freeze, but I was ready to fight. But that's another story.
Right.
But it was interesting. I called Apple support, and I had to be put on hold, and it said, we would like to provide you music. And it said, press 1 for like pop, press 2 for jazz, press 3 for classical. But then there was an option to press whatever for silence.
Yeah.
And I chose that one.
Did you choose silence?
I did, and just sat there because, I was able to understand. I was already all kinds of fired up, and I didn't need anything else working to fire it up anymore.
Right.
But it's funny because then, I go back and I check notes and I say, oh, we're going to talk about quiet time. It's important, and it's often, I think, undervalued because we feel we need constant noise. And that's so right. I love the 4 that you mentioned: playtime, quiet time, family time, and then of course work and learning time. But there's 4 other strategies, and so we could see how robust those first 2 were. That's why I wanted to focus a little bit more. But we have still committing to principles, creating your own space, creating daily chore checklists, and committing to waking up fully charged and adding value. So, let's talk a little bit about those other 4.
Right. Committing to principles. And so, as I mentioned before, our mind controls our brain. Our brain does not control our mind. In our mind, our thoughts and feelings are influenced by our chemicals, and which means that many times we have fickle feelings. 1 minute we feel this way, and a couple minutes later we feel completely different because maybe our cortisol has spiked. Okay. And so instead of giving into fickle feelings, I hear so many people right now stressing about the fact that they are stress eating, or they are stress online shopping, spending money that they might not even have right now, right. Whatever it is. And so instead of giving into those fickle feelings, research recommends that you instead identify a couple principles and commit to enacting those principles first before you give in to your fickle feelings. So, for example, when your cortisol is high, your brain is actually craving some dopamine. And so it's looking for a fast fix. Right. And so junk food, ordering junk online, watching unhealthy junk TV, yelling at your spouse, exploding, whatever it is. All of those actually give us a quick dopamine release and help us to feel better for a couple moments, but then later we feel bad. And then the guilt and the shame kind of sets in. And then what happens? Your cortisol skyrockets again. And then what are you looking for? You're looking for another quick fix. Yeah. And that's how we get into these unhealthy stress management cycles where it's actual chemical dependencies that we're dealing with. And so if you find when you're super stressed and you turn to an unhealthy stress management strategy, come up with a couple principles instead that you're going to enact first. So for example, instead of going straight to the junk food or ordering the junk online, drink a big glass of water and do 20 jumping jacks. Or go for a 5-minute walk in your house or outside if it's safe, and then send 3 positive texts to loved ones. Or go clean out a drawer. Or go make a list of things that you're appreciative of. And so all of those things will trigger higher levels of dopamine and oxytocin and give you a sense of, I am mature and responsible and I'm handling my stress in an appropriate, healthy way. Instead of when we give into our fickle feelings and we reach for an unhealthy stress management quick fix, which later causes more cortisol spikes for us.
A vicious cycle.
Yes, absolutely. And, people, we discount that idea of food addiction and substance abuse addiction and online gambling and porn and online shopping, addictive, all of those addictive stress management strategies are actually triggered by chemical reactions. And so once we're just aware, oh, my cortisol's high, I'm really stressed, I want to do this, but I'm going to do this instead. And if we do it for 5, 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is, a lot of times it gives our brain an opportunity to calm down, our chemicals can straighten out again, and then that urge, we're able to fight that urge off. So commit to those principles.
Well, and it's a lot like addiction in say drugs or alcohol. And right. I did an episode about a year ago on that. Your cell phone can provide hits of dopamine to you.
That's right.
And then it becomes an addiction because just like drugs or alcohol, you need a little bit more the next time around in order to reach that same level. And I read all the time that first time someone does meth, that they never are able to hit that same high, but they try. And that's a lot like what we're talking about. And people might be thinking, well, Scott, you're kind of comparing this to pretty heavy stuff, but not really, because we can really put ourselves on a negative path here when we talk about all of these things that we're falling into because we're stressed and we can't go anywhere or do anything about it.
Right. And addiction runs very strong in my family. And so I know from firsthand. But what I do understand now that I have learned more about it is, number one, it's real. And number two, it is triggered by chemical reactions. And so when we are aware and we acknowledge our stress and our anxious feelings, then we can better manage them. And so again, it's developing those social emotional skills and being aware of how cortisol does really affect us and drain us. Then we can take control and commit to the principles and really empower ourselves to make healthier stress management choices.
Absolutely. And, I do want to give a shout out to my friend, Ken Wallace, who is very active right now in reminding us the hashtag Project 3x3 is how I say it. But it's connecting with 3 friends every day, and then 3 friends connect with 3 more, and then we pass it on. And that's kind of what you had hit on. Send a text to 3 family members, a loving text. And I am trying to commit that to habit with many of my compadres throughout Illinois, and just sending a text and just saying, hey, how are you doing? And
right.
it doesn't have to be anything great in length, but just letting them know that you're there, that you care. It can go a long way.
Right. And that also, you just brought up an excellent point. And that is the correct way to pay someone a compliment. So did you know, Scott, that you can pay someone a compliment that will trigger a positive chemical reaction in them? And then when they respond to you, it triggers an even bigger positive chemical reaction. But the way that we give that compliment actually makes a difference. And so the appropriate way to compliment someone, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Is to praise the action first,
okay,
and then the trait.
Okay.
So for example, your kids, you might say, thank you so much for putting the dirty dishes away. You are very helpful. You might tell your spouse, thank you so much for helping me with this project. You are always so thoughtful and kind. Okay, so you praise the action first and then the trait. And what that does is it triggers in the brain, number one, that person is recognizing the quick action, but the person is also recognizing my characteristic or my trait, or implying that I do this consistently. And that triggers even stronger levels of oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and endorphins. And then they will respond back to you, thank you so much. And then that triggers even bigger oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins in you, because you're like, hey, I just made that person feel good.
Yeah. So it's a cycle, but not a vicious cycle. That's the cycle we want to go for.
Right. Exactly.
Hey,
exactly.
Julie, before we go for today, I want to touch on a bonus strategy, and that is turning off or limiting our news or social media intake. And I think I heard a collective gasp throughout my listeners there. Right. But turning off or limiting our news or social media intake, it seems so simple. But I think it is the hardest thing to do, because you even alluded to this several times earlier. We are social creatures. And so a quarantine is leading us to spend even more time on social media to feed that crave and give us that shot of dopamine we just talked about. But what kind of adverse effects does this have on our health when we're constantly looking at the new updates and the new confirmed cases and the deaths and everything else? I mean, this has to have some adverse effects, right?
Absolutely. And it's connected to our diet. So if you think of our diet is everything that we consume visually, auditorily, lingually, or through our mouth, and then dermally, our skin. Our skin is our largest organ, and it's extremely permeable. So whatever we slather on is going to be in our bloodstream pretty quickly. But in terms of visually and auditorily, so many of us just have the news on in the background as white noise.
Yeah.
And we don't recognize what that does to our chemicals throughout the day, whether we have the volume turned up or not. So when we're walking by and the volume's turned down and that big red alert is flashing, that actually, spikes our cortisol. And on the news right now, that big red alert is flashing constantly.
Yeah.
And then when we have that auditory noise just in the background, that just triggers our cortisol as well. And then when we're hopping on social media every 10 minutes or whatever. So if you find you are waking up more drained than charged, again, think about these 7 strategies. Plus, pay attention to your diet. What are you allowing to go in visually, auditorily, lingually, and dermally? And can you make some adjustments? And so control your controllables, stick to a schedule, commit to principles instead of giving into fickle feelings. Make sure everyone has their own space in the house that nobody else is going to touch, whether it's a blanket fort or a special little seating area.
Yeah.
Commit to waking up fully charged by meeting your Maslow needs.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get free young brain and mature brain Maslow assessments from my newsletter. Just sign up adamsteaching.com, totally free.
Okay.
You can get those in your inbox. And then add value. How are you adding value to people right now, even though you're not face-to-face? Are you sending a positive text? Are you writing letters? Can you post a positive quote on your window so when people are walking by, they see that quote? But then pay attention to that news and that social media that you're having on in the background, or you might be checking multiple times a day. And instead, play relaxing music, or maybe some throwback 80s classics, or whatever your jam is.
Yeah.
I love to put on the music with the nature sounds. I just Google it from YouTube or something, put on a 4-hour track in the background, and I love that. But it's perfectly normal to be stressed right now because of the situation. Young brains can be more sensitive to stress, and so they're looking to us. And so we want to just make sure their basic needs are met. If there is academic slippage in the long run, just like there might be a little bit of academic slippage over summer, we will overcome that and we will fill in those gaps.
We absolutely
when
will.
We come back together. We absolutely will. What's more important right now is that we're just focused on mental, physical health and wellness, emerging with positive relationships. And maybe if we can take a little extra time and build some skills, start a new hobby, something like that.
Learn a new
Those
language.
are the important things. That's right. Those
Subscribe
are the
to this
important
podcast.
things
That's another one.
That's exactly right. I listen to about 5 to 8 podcasts a week. Every morning when I work out, I have a podcast plan. And Anchored in Education is one of my favorites.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I will say, if people just absolutely need to see some news, they need to check out John Krasinski's Some Good News on YouTube.
That's right.
And,
I love it.
Get your news and make it good. So, Julie, I cannot thank you enough for taking so much time to talk to us about a very relevant topic right now and very important for our overall health and well-being. And your wisdom is invaluable, and I so much appreciate having you tonight.
Thank you. It's been such an honor to be on again. I appreciate all that you do, and I appreciate that you're rising up to your calling, and you are helping others to do the same by having this podcast and just being so committed to strengthening and serving others. So I appreciate you, Scott. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And I hope to talk to you guys all again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good.
Oh, I accidentally cut her off there, but Julie, you have a good night too as well. Hey, before I wrap up, let me just give you a spoiler alert that Julie is slated to rejoin us for regular programming to talk about another one of her best-selling books called Game Changers. So watch for that later in 2020. And if you're not following Julie Adams on Twitter today, well, let me just say you need to fix that. Find her by searching at Adams Teaching. And you can also find her mastermind courses. Again, we talked about that by visiting her website, adamsteaching.com. As always, this live show and even the podcast would not be possible without you, my listeners. And I'm always looking for ways to improve, so hit me up with ideas. And again, I want to thank my wife, Jennifer. She takes over my Twitter account and plays the commercials and all around keeps me on track for these live shows. So thank you to her. So remote learning, quarantines, shelter in place, all of these things are taking a toll on individuals. And remember, individuals means teachers, support staff, bus drivers, parents, students, community members. There's a good chance that many of the staple summer programs or activities we are so accustomed to have or will soon be canceled. Jennifer and I have talked many times about how difficult and stressful it is at times for her to work from home, plus balance remote learning for Easton and Sage. Then you add into the fact that you can't do anything that you normally would do to break the monotony. You know, there's right now no going out and enjoying a nice sit-down meal. There's no going shopping, which probably affects me more than it does her. But there's no movies. There's no sporting events. I'll probably make a lot of people upset here, but I'm not a fan of the movie Groundhog Day. But I saw a funny meme the other day that said, "It's quarantine day again." You know, but is that not truly how we're feeling each day right now? I also saw another meme that said, "Until further notice, the days of the week are now called this day, that day, the other day, someday, yesterday, today, and next day." So it's humorous and it's still okay to laugh. But the underlying context is true. We are faced with scenarios that we have never had to deal with before, both professionally and personally. Some of my friends were giving me a hard time on Zoom a week or so ago because I was the only one in the meeting with a tie on. But that is part of what keeping a normal routine means to me. It is almost guaranteed that if you do not practice some of the strategies that Julie talked about this evening, you will begin to feel like you are going crazy. But remember this too shall pass. We will not be in quarantine forever. When we begin transitioning back into life as we knew it, we need to have strong individuals. There is a way that we can leverage these unusual times to strengthen our ability to teach, to strengthen our families, to create strong personal habits, and to come away more positive than ever. It will take work. Most things worth having do. But I have faith in you. I will support you in any way possible. I will cheer for you, lift you up, celebrate your victories, because you are not in this alone. Our country is going through this together, and it was political before, but it is becoming even more political now. So it's time that we bind together, decrease our stress, and be amazing. Because after all, we are all anchored in education.